Okay, good evening, a very warm welcome, and thank you for giving this opportunity, Auntie, for the second time. I'm really excited. And as Yash said, he's not going to talk about AI, but eventually he ended up saying AI and ML because that's how the industry is moving. I will also be touching AI, but lastly at the end, would be covering more about unstructured data and a very topic that correlates to what Yash also covered. So Yash spoke about structured data, customer ID, message ID, phone number, and the BigQuery being used for remote functions, executions, or offloading the processing to that part. I will cover my use case of how we went through the journey of unstructured data, being data chaos, and how we manage that chaos to compliance, to the value journey. And then now what is the upcoming trends that we see to the implementation that we built close to 4 years ago, and how could that be improvised now with the Google offerings, Google Cloud Services, as well as the BigQuery again to go about. So before I begin, can somebody say what is unstructured data? Anyone? Go ahead.
Free text.
Free text. Yes, that's one format. Image. Yes. Multimedia, VFX, entertainment industry has that. How about your digital pathology document that you get? Any documents, any emails as such? Can you think about, wild guess, how much of the data an enterprise usually has, and what percentage of that enterprise data will be unstructured? Just take a wild guess. We all are coming from the corporate world where we work with huge transactional data. We have multiple applications generating data that we, Yash also spoke about data privacy and all that. But any wild guess as to how much of an enterprise data is in, and what percent of that enterprise data could be unstructured?
Depends on the industry that you talk about. So if it's a legal or medical, very high unstructured.
Very true, very true, and that's the right perspective. Everything in the data is always a context driven as to what your context is and all that. But agnostic of the industry, we will see some stats which will be very astonishing for all of us. And those facts are from the leading industries or partners and international data committees or the constitution to go about. So with that, I will quickly go to the next one as to what we are going to talk about. So we know that unstructured data. Thank you. We talked about that unstructured data is the kind of the data which does not follow the traditional model structure, schema structure. It comes in a various format, text, entertainment data, images, logs, you name it. Now, the smart devices that we have, it's generating so much of sensor data and all that. These are all unstructured data here. So we will go over very quickly as to what the growth of the unstructured data looks out to be. A very real-time use case about how we demystify the unstructured data and really went from journey of chaos to compliance to value additions. How unstructured data could be transformed, and what are the latest Google offerings to go about is what we will come to with the usage of the BigQuery, connecting the dots of AI, connecting the dots of querying unstructured data through SQL. How about that? Have you heard about? Can you think about that? You can have your SQL construct being utilized for querying images data. It was a new thing for me when I picked it up and I started working on it. So we'll take a look at it and sneak peek into that particular one. So let's quickly get into. So this is what. You have any questions? Yeah. Okay. This is what the data talks about. As we said, it is industry to industry, but almost Gartner has actually repeatedly year saying that 80 to 90% of the enterprise data is unstructured data. To the number that it stands out currently as, International Data Corporation has counted it to be 175 zettabytes of the data. Any like, again, why I thought about what the number could be? We say petabytes, gigabytes, all that. Very close. It's 25 zeros. And that number is actually growing year on year. And the compounded growth rate of that unstructured data is roughly at around 62, more than 60%. Which means that in the coming years, we need more storage space. We need a better data management of it. Because the unstructured data comes with several different formats, the sources of the data is so discrete and it is so wide that you need the traditional data management strategies of the government that have kind of been followed for the structured data may not be lifted and shifted and applied for the unstructured data because of the complexity, because of the veracity and the velocity at which it is actually kind of increasing. We call it as 3Vs in that particular sense. My colleague spoke about that it can be from the industry. We see not just the financial industry where the data could be a customer contact center data. It could be the oil and gas. It could be in healthcare. In any industry you name it, the unstructured data is very prevalent and it is actually growing year on year. And unless we actually take a step at this point of time to manage this unstructured data well, it would become maybe a lost opportunity for the organizations because you haven't looked at that particular data, whether it is from sensitivity, whether it is from the business insight that you can draw from that data altogether. So that's what we will be kind of roughly going into. Any questions at this point? No, okay. So we know the challenges from the unstructured data, correct? Since the data formats are quite different, it's not very easy for you to kind of write a simple query saying that, hey, select asterisk from this particular table where so and so matches and please give me that particular comment. The data is not in like if you see now social media, that's the biggest creator or the generator of the unstructured data at this point of time. And organizations do want to do sentiment analysis on that particular data to really understand how the branding of that particular organization is. What are the sentiments that the employees are also posting on the social medias and all that. So there's a lot of analytics that is needed for employee experience, customer experience, looking at the growth opportunities that an organization can pivot into using that particular data altogether. But there are challenges that the data poses, correct? So as we saw that the data is humongous, at the same time, we also have another pulse survey that actually constituted that 71% of the organization feels that they are not managing their unstructured data. They actually think of it to be like a only for a storage or a regulatory or compliance perspective, and they're not kind of really looking at it from a business incentives or business insight perspective. Why? Because the data is sitting in shared drives, SharePoints, multiple systems have generated that data, fragmented systems have kind of generated that data all together during the processing, or we look at our emails, logs, and all that, and that's all sitting in a different part. Integrating that with the existing system, which is more transactional in nature, is becoming difficult. Workflows that have human in loop process or an automated workflow also, it is quite different to kind of do that. Indexing has been the key element in the RDBMS. We index the data, we find it out that okay, this particular column, the search aspect of that column actually increases when we do the indexing. But that indexing and searching capabilities in the traditional unstructured data has been a limitation altogether. Storage complexity. The data is called as raw because it is redundant, because it is obsolete, and because it is actually trivial data. So many times you will see that we will refer unstructured data as raw data, because it is sitting in isolations, it is sitting and in not being utilized. It's a stale data that is there. And another study which talked about that organization typically has 54% of the data as stale data, but you are storing them from compliance, regulatory perspective, sensitive information like PRI or your health information, if it is a healthcare industry, or your employee or your customer data is actually residing in those particular documents, and you're storing them from a retention point, but you're not utilizing them. So storage complexity has increased, and storage uses have increased a lot on that one. Data quality and consistency, data retention. There are many organizations who have actually got the consent order or maybe like penalties because they have not been able to comply with the data retention. And that actually gave birth to my use case, which I'll be talking about in the next slide. Operational inefficiency, if the data is spread across, think about yourself being a business analyst who has to open up 4 different documents to really look at the nitty-gritties of that particular data to be able to evaluate. It's more manual in nature. Because the data is not extracted, because the OCR capabilities is not prevalent, the data is looked upon by a human, and that's not the best utilization of some of these trying to go about. So, and of course, security and privacy is always the topmost priority for that. Now, very quickly, what are the risks that we have, and then we'll jump into the use case very more important. So, if you look at it, the risks, without looking at the slide, can somebody say, what are the risks? We spoke about it. I think we can get away with not having a slide. What are the risks? Data. Those are more technical ones. Can you think about more from an organizational perspective? If you have unstructured data being not managed, could that lead to regulatory violations? GDPR, general data regulations that we have, data protection regulations. Organization could get a fine, or they can get legal notices for not being able to store the customer data, use the customer data for what they have collected the data for, and not dispose the data in the right format. So it could have regulatory compliance violations, it could have legal repercussions, it could lead to your data breaches and data security. The more unstructured data that we have, you are creating a more vector space for your vulnerabilities. Data breaches kind of happen altogether because there are less access control. Visibility of that data is very less. Control of that particular data cannot be generated. Access controls are loosely granted, or they do not exist in many organizations. Security risk in terms of data losses that can happen. Your intellectual property can be lost because I don't have something that is created in a Word document, showed from steering committee to board committee, got the business case and all that. And eventually that intellectual property is sitting on intellectual property is also at the risk of being kept to go about. So those are the risks that we kind of read about. And beyond this compliance, the biggest thing that we felt about was that how could you really draw growth opportunities, business values from this particular data? So there is some correlation of the user transactional data that can kind of be combined with this to really bring that business inside and create those revenue growth opportunities within the organization. That is what we will have to call. And any point, anything, any questions from anyone? No? Okay. I hope nobody's sleeping. Okay, let's jump into the use case. Okay. So my organization, I am a technologist who brings just around 22 years of experience working as a developer in Java, Python, grown to become a cloud architect, worked on big data, worked on Spark, processing engines, and now for the past 8 years being an AI enthusiast. I have close around 10 different production artificial intelligence, traditional NLPs, convoluted neural networks to generative AI use cases in my financial industry that I have the opportunity to work on. And that actually excited me to bring this common topic of unstructured data, which is very prevalent, but to a larger extent, it's not kind of getting its due attention at this point in time. So the problem statement was we had to comply with the record retention policy. Our structured data had proper purging. We had a centralized system through which we would understand how to purge the data, how to archive the data. We had the tiering for the storage, for the proper data lake, data warehouse, transactional data, and all that. The biggest was we had 9 data centers, and this I'm talking about a bank which is close to around 220 years old. So you can think about the data is pretty old. People have left. Their footprints are still lying in the store, in the SharePoint, everywhere. And we have to really look at 9 data centers spread across 3 continents. 17 satellite locations spread across 4 continents. And this data was, at a snapshot of point, was close to around 4.7 petabytes of the data. And the data size was close to around 1,200. We can just name 4 or 5 or a handful here. Code snippets were put. Codes which was in COBOL, written in COBOL. Codes which was code snippets which was in mainframes. We found all of them when we were crawling through the data. And we had to kind of first start with the inventory generation of where this data is. I think one of my colleagues spoke about the biggest challenge is how to find the data. Right? Where is this data located? That was also like the biggest thing to kind of pop up. So the problem statement was to have this data retention policies, data retention codes being applied, which eventually means that we want to store this data based on certain criteria for 5 years, 7 years. If you do not want to, there is a proper disposal mechanism that you need to follow to archive it. No longer on the case. Now it's a cloud storage sharing that we will go about for storing your data. How did we go about? We had 9 months of time frame to really build this technology solutions, starting from inventory identifications to classifications, the application of the record retention codes, and doing your proper disposal activities, largely 4 elements to go about, which is what is in the approach. The benefits that we actually had was we could comply with the record retention policies 9 months of the time period that we have. And on the right-hand side is what you kind of really see the sneak peek of what are the things that we went about. Starting with inventory identification, because it was a widespread data on the multiple data centers, satellite locations, and all that. And the biggest thing that we went about was that once the entire, and then the next slide talks about the model, which we can skip because the AI model is not a topic of our interest at this point. But we went about even experimenting with multiple types of the artificial intelligence model, machine models, to really say, well, can we use decision trees? Can we use regression? Ultimately, we wanted to classify the data, but there was, for any model, you need to have your labels being created. So, and that labels were not existing. So we had to utilize the operations team to be able to create the labels, have that training data being created for us, and then run through the entire process of really training, increasing the efficacy of the models. Initially, the false positive was pretty high. We started with an efficacy of close around 42% of the models because the false positive was pretty high, and then eventually with 9%.
What is this? That's what happened.
This is the simple vector classification model that we went about for classifying this particular data to say that is this. So if you may think about it, the inventory led to 1,200 different data types. But we applied 20% of the rules to say that 80% of the data is actually kind of.
Sorry, 2 years ago.
This is 4 years ago. This is 4 years ago. Sorry, I didn't get the question. Yeah. Now there are multiple tools which you can plug in as this. But at the time when we were kind of doing it, I think the advancement in really having a BigQuery or unstructured data processing or unstructured data query and storage was very limited. So it was more in-house developed, and that's how we went about. But if we fast forward in 4 years now, there are tools, there are products that you can kind of really plug and play. Not everything could be still disregarded to what we develop. There's still a lot of usage. There's a lot of components that you can go about utilizing it in the go forward manner.
No, I was just putting it in the time.
Yeah. Sure. Any other questions? No? Okay. So just fast forwarding it, we had human in loop and a model feedback again for model efficacy. We went about really having data maintenance, which is once your data compliance was kind of created, the next thought process was to how could the storage be optimized from a costing perspective, from the infrastructure maintenance standpoint and all that. The next part that came into is that now that we have the data, what can we do with this data? Right? Can we actually democratize the data? Can we give the data access to anybody in the organization? Have you heard about that? If you're not managing your data, you're not managing your AI in the current world, correct? So managing your data, whether it is unstructured or structured, becomes very important. So if you are having that data, once you have disclosed and everything, but the remaining good amount of data that you have, what should you draw the business insight from? How can you have a data analytics being created on those particular ones, whether it is using the traditional BI, Tableau, and those kinds of looker kind of capabilities, or can you actually have more advanced AI models that can actually do a more predictive analysis for you? Can they actually do more kind of an advanced complex analysis to go about? And that's what brings me, I think I'll jump a few of the slides and quickly jump into, I think we'll jump that one. Okay. This is something which really excited me, and Yash also touched upon a little on this particular one. How many of you have worked on data lake or any kind of a data lake? Okay, data lake, data warehouse, lake. Okay. More from the machine predictive aspect of it, like what's the usage that you are working on the data lake? Data modeling, that's good, right? Okay. I think I saw your hand as well. Yeah, your hand.
I just started in my stuff.
Okay, it's more from the academic perspective. Okay, sure. So there is a new advancement which really is interesting at this point of time, and this is taken from the AI and Data Summit from the Databricks. And Databricks actually proudly talk about democratizing your data and also democratizing your AI at this point of time, and combining that with the AI, combining that with the AI and machine learning at this point. The problem statement that this talks about is that most of the organizations, and I'm talking about financial industries, even in Australia, I do find many of the banks which are like legacy of 100 years, 60 years, and all together, correct? Which has grown from being a business which was more manual, technology being an enabler for that organizations, to being now technology being the driving factor for the growth perspective. So, but still there is this fragmented systems. There are these isolated data lake and data warehouses that exist, and there are separate set of people, separate set of technologies which are being utilized for doing that. Like we can actually talk about, like when you work on a data lake, you typically have a raw data on which you're working. You're trying to kind of really understand that patterns and go about, right? Whereas in the data warehouse, you have more structured data. And so how could that thin line between the structured and the unstructured data could be kind of blurred? And you can have a unified data store which can be utilized for querying it, whether using the SQL construct or whether using the natural language for doing it. How about that? It's easy said, but it's very difficult for the organizations which have legacies to go about. But that's where the financial industry is moving, and that's where my organization, after that 4 years of implementation of the unstructured data, is now moving into. We have multi-cloud strategies. We do have AWS and GCP as our cloud partners, and we are extensively working on using BigQuery for bringing both your analytics as well as your AR capabilities together into something which is a BigQuery, big lake kind of a features to go about. And that's what this one talks about. No longer isolated, fragmented systems, no longer having different set of data analysts, data scientists being isolated. They work together because if somebody is very good in using SQL or writing the SQL assets, let them use that. But if somebody is very good in understanding data patterns by using a natural language, let them have that capability. At the end of the day, you really want to have the outcome being taken out from that data and being utilized for your decision, informed decision making to go about. Okay. And this is my last slide. I think hopefully, yeah, or one more, but I can skip that. So this is what Yash also touched upon. Okay, 10 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay. So if we look at it, Yash touched upon the BigQuery. Right? He touched upon saying that the BigQuery and his use case was more about structured data. He had the customer phone numbers and that, and he was leveraging data warehouse, traditional capabilities with an extended feature of remote functions that can be utilized. Right? But BigQuery is more than that. So BigQuery has extended its capabilities to the unstructured data at a very large extent. It has given some data types called as object tables. It has which can store this unstructured data in its format. You can also have the BigQuery being integrated with an open query standards, Apache Iceberg. Has anyone worked on that? Open standards of query? Okay. So yeah, so BigQuery is now integrating that with the Apache Iceberg for having that capabilities. It is also having the query processing capabilities, query processing agents like Spark or Presto being utilized for